Hello you guys, welcome back to the channel. Another reptile episode, and this one of my favourites. Keeping, breeding the four-line rat snake, the European four-line snake, but I guess similar to the Japanese four-line rat snake. We're talking the European four-line snake, a big, beautiful and very peaceable snake to keep, and a very sturdy rat snake. Something I've always wanted to keep, and only 3 years ago managed to get my first ones. From a great guy up in Yorkshire. Great guy up in York, I guess. This year we've produced them. 3 years later, they've grown on for 3 years, and it's a snake that I've often looked for on holidays as a lad and a younger man, I guess, in Mediterranean regions. Found a big dead one on the road once, but never found a live one. And looking back, nearly all those family holidays were in the height of summer, pretty much a poor time to go herping for snakes in hot countries compared to the spring and the autumn. But of course, when you go on family holidays, you kind of want to go when it's hot and sunny, and I guess that's why really my luck was never in. Just the odd dead one on the road, which probably came out at night. I'm going to talk to you all the way through the sort of the life cycle and how you can keep and breed these beautiful snakes. They're just so lovely to work with, quite shy even as adults, quite nocturnal. They're not something that's out and about as much as many snakes, but well worth keeping. And if you like pet snakes you can get out and handle, yeah, right up there, top of the list. A really nice sized big snake without being huge, and yeah, personalities to die for. Everyone you know and speak to that catches them in the wild, they'll all say the same. Catch a big adult one in the wild, it'll be like a pet. Just so unaggressive and unassuming, just beautiful snakes. So we'll start at the beginning, but I guess the beginning is a bit chicken and egg. Let's start with bremating those adults. So for hibernating, I go into my hibernation racks, as does much stuff. These are about 2.5 foot by, I don't know, 20 inch. Tubs from IKEA with the lids removed in most cases. Smaller stuff has the lids still on. Just a simple homemade rack system. I'll hibernate things in there. Also, it's a breeding rack for some of the smaller cluras, like the smaller milk snakes nowadays. But for hibernation, just give them something to hide under. Coir husk, my usual substrate for the bigger snakes. Water, even though they're hibernating, or brumating, but you guys know what I mean. And then I set a heat mat at the back there, you can't see, on the back wall, and that's set at 10 degrees, and that'll only be there that's 10 degrees, but it will stop this whole area going below 5 degrees, and that's in a cold outbuilding. Of course you could fridge them, and of course I would say in the UK with a 2 foot deep hibernaculum, you could hibernate these guys actually outside perfectly fine if the hibernaculum was built deep and well, for sure. And they'll be here October, cooling off well by October, until the spring. And the spring will be, I guess, really what you decide the spring is. So this year my snakes had a long brumation, and it was pretty much April before anything woke up. But often we'll pull these guys out, you know, February time, warm them up, get them feeding for March, and then breed from there. But there you go. Brumation side of things, yes, you could keep them perfectly fine in here. I don't know, they're quite nocturnal. They're not the best display snakes. They're a really great snake to be interested in and to actually work with and handle. But even at this adult breeding size, they're relatively shy, relatively stick to the darker places, really. So you could, yeah, keep them in a rack. The only thing is, when you see them in a nice size enclosure, a vivarium with stuff to climb and shelves and things, yeah, they do seem to kind of use it, really. They're a snake that's pretty good at climbing. So remember, mine were bremated at 3 years old. They weren't bremated in any other winter, just their pre-breeding one when I thought they're big enough now, and they were coming up for 3 years old. Bremated mine for several months, about 5 months, but I'm sure a couple of months late winter would be more than enough to trigger successful breeding. Bring them out of brumation, warm them up gradually over a few days, and get them feeding. And mine, once they were feeding well, They were paired up, real typical colubrid pairing. Come out of brumation, bring them up to operating temperature, get them feeding, get them working again, get their bodies working properly, and then introduce the pairs together. And I left them together for quite some weeks. I'd just be careful when I fed them, but I've never had any problem cohabiting these snakes. And then as they looked gravid, as one of them looked to be really gravid, I separated them out, put in a lay box, my usual thing now, I don't even bother with moss. I just put a dark lay box in, usually a black box from one of the cheap shops like the pound shops, cut a hole in the top. They prefer a hole in the top they can go down in than a hole in the side. They feel more secure, don't ask me why. And I'll put about a quarter or third coir chips in there, quite well dampened down, not wet, not soggy, but definitely moist. No problem at all. Eggs were laid, and those eggs were incubated in a homemade incubator from a fridge with a heat mat and a good thermostat. See other bits on my channel, you'll see what I mean, and watch the reptile playlist. 27.5 degrees Celsius centigrade in hatch boxes, about a third full of moist perlite. I've tried all kinds of hatch mediums, commercial ones, hatch right's really good, but you know what? Nowadays, I tend to just use moistened perlite with everything, whether it's moistened so you can squeeze it in your hand and nothing drips out, but it just clumps together. That's the sort of texture I'm talking about. A couple of pinholes in that hatch box, just so there is some air movement in there, and away they went. I'm going to check now so I can tell you how long those eggs took to hatch, because I've forgotten. Hold that thought. Pretty short hatch. Around 50 days, only around 50 days at 27.5 centigrade. So compared to some snakes, because they weren't small eggs, pretty short time indeed. I'll show you the young and I'll talk you through getting those young going and growing them on. Hold on. Okay, so once those eggs hatch, they'll go into something like this. Reasonable ventilation. Coir peat, nothing with chippings. I don't keep any of my hatchlings on any kind of chipping substrate, because if they swallow it with a food item, it won't pass through their cloaca and they will eventually die. So a fine mixture. I use a coir peat fibre. Water bowl that I can overflow, and that'll keep one area slightly moist. Some of my hatchlings, like the milk snakes, the Brazilian rainbow boas, on quite a damp substrate relatively. The bull snakes straight onto dry newspaper, but I like a bit of moisture for my hatchlings. Little feeding station, you can drop feed before lights out. Little feeding station, a Pringles lid works well, so it's not getting caked in food, and at least one hide. Now here they are. I've got what's left. I've just got 2 per enclosure, and this is the sort of size they are. But can you see what a beautiful species this is as a hatchling? They look like male adders in breeding dress. Absolutely gorgeous, the best looking hatchlings ever, I think. They're just that silver and black. Whoa. So to give you some idea of scale, lovely size hatchling, not big but certainly not small. Beautiful creatures. So getting them feeding as hatchlings can or cannot be problematic to a small degree, not because they're lizard feeders or anything like that, just because of where they come from. Many northern climate snakes will brumate before they start feeding. They'll hatch out, they'll spend the late summer, early autumn looking for brumation sites, living off the yolk in them, and they'll probably not even feed until the spring triggers them off. So these have been drop fed pinky mice, small rat pups, chick legs. Oddly, the 4 here now haven't taken a drop feed. The 4 that have gone to people such as, remember when Nigel Marvin came up, he had a pair, he was the first one to take some, and I said, these are not feeding yet, but you know what you're doing. And I gave him some advice born of what I already know, and one of his took a drop pinky within a few days of him having it at night. Another pair went to another great guy, same thing happened there. When I got my youngsters originally, they were just like this. I brought them as not yet feeding youngsters, and the guy said you might have to brumate them for a few weeks before the feed response kicks in, or you might not. I just kept dropping pinkies and small rat pups in, and in the end, both of mine eventually ate. But of course, there's nothing more worrying than having a non-feeding hatchling and it not eating. And you, especially if you start to see weight loss, that's when you've sort of probably left it too long. So, Nigel Marvin's now going to brumate his non-feeding one. For me, we might go down that route, but for now, we've actually just assist fed a couple of these to see how they get on. Goodness me. Snake wrangling and phone wrangling. Oh no, hold on. Oh, we've got it. Nearly had to down camera. So what I've done with these guys is a medium rat, cut off the thin end of the rat tail and assist fed them. Soaked it first so it slips down easily. Obviously make sure it goes the right way with the bristles on the rat fur. And assist fed them just like the black-headed pythons. So what they're going to get every 4 or 5 days, a drop feed. If they don't take it, 2 or 3 days later, they'll get an assist feed, and then left a few weeks and a drop feed, and so on. So I know they're getting something meaty in their system. And let's hope, just like the black-headed pythons, it'll just kick them in and I won't have to worry about them losing body mass. But we'll see. And again, more than likely, if I just kept drop feeding every 4 or 5 days, just like my original pair, I'm pretty sure they'd kick in. But the other answer is a few weeks brumation to trigger that waking up in the spring feeding response. Remember, my original pair, my adults, were cohabbed quite a lot of the time. So we've got two in each tub. I've got 4 of these beautiful things left. Let me tell you about rearing them on from there. Okay, so you've got your hatchling home from a breeder or from a shop, reptile shop and so on and so forth. And you've got a well-established feeder, let's say, so it's already feeding. But of course, you haven't got it settled into your house yet, and it's a small, tiny snake. Take my advice. Don't take the advice from all the new age Facebook experts that haven't got a lot of experience with these things. Maybe they've had one corn snake in their lives and read lots of other Facebook experts that haven't got a lot of experience in these things. Don't set it up in a ginormous, beautifully landscaped, multi-layered enclosure, fully bioactive, blah, blah, blah. Just set it up, if it's a small snake, in something similar to I've shown you with mine. Give it 2 hides, 1 at each end, because unlike my heated room, you're probably going to need a heat source. Easiest thing is a small heat mat under 1/4 to 1/3 of one end of that enclosure. Make sure that thermostat is used. Make sure the thermostat probe is taped onto the heat mat. And critically, don't put loads of substrate over that end of the enclosure, because if you put a deep layer of substrate over a heat mat, if you like, even though it's underneath the enclosure, it will insulate in the heat, either cause a serious overheating, or if the thermostat's doing its job properly, of course, your snake's not going to feel any benefit, any warmth at all. So yeah, maybe a centimetre of substrate over that end for sure. But that's going to be your easiest way. A simple enclosure, 2 nice, tight, snuggly hide boxes, 1 over the heat source, 1 at the cold end. A water bowl it can just about curl up in is more than sufficient. Keep it simple, and I'll tell you why. The snake's feeding, it's established, you trust the person you bought it off. Now it's having a complete change of lifestyle. Get that snake feeding regularly and well in your care, and then by all means move it up into an all singing, all dancing enclosure that you know where it hangs out, and in the evening you can place food very near to where it hangs out and it will find the food. Put in a snake that's not feeding or has decided to go off its food because it's in a whole new world, it's come from a breeder, it hasn't come from a huge enclosure, there's a good chance it's just not going to find food, or indeed feed for quite some time. You want that young snake to be settled and feeding well in your care. Feed it whatever the breeder told you it's feeding. Pinky mice soon give way to fluff mice. Chick legs or chick thighs with a scaly foot bit cut off really work well for some snakes, not all. Rat pups and so on. Bring it up in size, and as the snake grows, feed it mice. You can then feed it small to medium rats. You can then feed it day-old cockerels, turkey poults. You decide. A good mixture of food is great. They're not fussy once they get going. I've always preferred, on the whole, to feed my snakes maybe 2 or 3 or even more multiple food items in one sitting that are not really any thicker or much thicker than the thickest part of the snake, rather than give them a big blowout that's going to really tax their digestive system. That's the way I tend to feed most of my snakes. Now and again, my pythons will get a big old feed. Generally, my adult 4-line snakes might get 5-day-old cockerels, or one small to medium rat, or maybe 3 mice and 2-day-old cockerels, that kind of thing. Small multiple feeds I prefer for my snakes. You do what you like, but get them established. As they grow bigger, again, move them into bigger enclosures. As mentioned, of course, if you want to keep those snakes in a rack system, they will thrive and they'll do just fine. To me, although they're not a snake that tends to be out a lot, sort of really showing off in the day. Yeah, I quite like keeping mine in Vivaria, you know, with shelves and hides and branches, just a bit more interesting for them. Do they care? I really don't know, but I quite like these snakes, and I quite like it in the ability to be able to just get them out, handle them, and come in the evening and see them going about their business for sure. Shelf, water, coir husk, various of the hides, climbing areas, heat source on a thermostat. This came with a golden child reticulated python. It's 5 foot by 18 by 18. That's been upgraded into a larger enclosure, and my pair have spent the summer. This has been their biggest enclosure. They've normally been in 4 by 2 by 2. This tight shelf, by the way, you want a tight shelf. You can just, oh, you frigger, I forgot there was a snake in there. This is gonna do. There's a black-tailed crebo lurking in there, a hungry one. So he's in there while they're brood mating. But this enclosure, plenty of things to climb, hiding places, basking spot, but only ambient room lighting. I've never seen these things come out and bask under light, but I would say they definitely will. If the ambient temperature is around maybe 20 at one end and maybe 30 degrees under a heat lamp, you'll probably see them really thermoregulate. In here, it's always at least 25 degrees C, and then they've got a 28 to 30 basking end. And to be honest, it was so warm in there, they spent most of their time hiding, as they always have done. I find these snakes a bit nocturnal and quite shy, even as adults. But that kind of enclosure, with or without a UV spectrum lighting, you decide what's best for your snakes. I would probably go taller if I was designing something just for them, with even higher hiding places. They'll use every single bit of your enclosure 3-dimensionally. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really enjoy this species. They're not easy to get here in the UK, probably not easy to get in the States either. Bit more easy on the continent of Europe. Highly recommend them. If you ever get the chance to get one, I definitely get one that's young with that lovely black and silver, and watch it change. Watch those black blotches fade out, the 4 lines, the side stripes come in, and it literally does phase out. The stripes come in as that black and silver fades down, and gradually the blotches become less and less, and the stripes become much more abundant, or much darker and more noticeable. Highly recommend them. Brilliant pet snakes, brilliant snakes to handle, and for sure a very different rat snake from the Norman that most of your mates will have for sure. Like and subscribe for goodness sakes, and I'll see you in the next one.